It was a dark and stormy night when I found myself alone in the woods. I was on a camping trip with some friends, but they had all gone back to the city early. I decided to stay an extra night by myself, thinking it would be a great opportunity to enjoy the peace and quiet of nature. As I sat by the campfire roasting marshmallows and listening to the rain fall on my tent, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. I brushed it off as just my imagination running wild and just went to bed. But as the night wore on, the feeling only grew stronger. I heard strange noises outside my tent, rustling in the bushes and snapping of twigs. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. Just as I was about to go up and investigate these noises, I heard a blood-curdling scream pierce through the air. It was coming from deep within the woods, and it sent shivers down my spine. I knew I had to check it out, even though every fiber of my being was telling me to stay put. Just run, don't go. I grabbed my flashlight and headed into the woods, following the sound of the scream. The rain had picked up, making it difficult to see more than a few feet in front of me, but I pressed on, driven by my curiosity and my fear. Somebody might have been hurt and they might need help, so I wouldn't be able to live myself if someone died because I just didn't go and investigate. As I got deeper into the woods, the feeling of dread only grew stronger. I felt like I was being watched, like something was stalking me from the shadows. But every time I turned around, nothing was there. Finally, I came into a clearing in the woods. There, in the center of the clearing, was a small cabin. It was old and run down, with a rusty metal roof and broken windows. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, perhaps. But the scream had definitely come from inside this cabin. I cautiously approached the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. I pushed the door wide open and was immediately hit with a wave of musty air. Inside the cabin was dark and creepy. There was a single room with the table in the center and a few chairs pushed against the walls. But what caught my attention was the writing on the walls. In what looked like dried blood, there were words scrawled all over the walls. They were illegible at first, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out phrases like, "Get out while you still can," or "You're not safe here." That's when I heard the scream again. This time it was much, much closer. I turned around and saw a figure standing right at the doorway, blocking my exit. It was a man, but he looked like he had been dead for years. His skin was gray and mottled, his eyes sunken into his skull. He wore tattered clothes, and they looked like they had just been buried in the ground for decades. It's like he's been reanimated. I stumbled backwards trying to get away from the figure, but he reached out and grabbed me by the arm, his grip like iron. I struggled to break free, but it was no use. The man pulled me towards him, his mouth opened wide in a silent scream, and that's when I realized he was not alone. Dozens of other figures emerged from the shadows, all looking just as dead as the first. I was surrounded with no way out. They closed in on me, their cold hands reaching for me. I screamed, but it was drowned out by their unearthly moans. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were all gone. I was alone in the cabin with nothing but writings on the wall and the memory of their touch to prove that they had ever been. I stumbled backwards, gasping for breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it all been a hallucination, or had I stumbled upon some kind of supernatural presence in the woods? But all my questions were cut short as I heard another noise, this time from outside of the cabin. It was a low, guttural growl, followed by the sounds of footsteps approaching. I knew I had to get out of here fast. I made a run for the door, but it wouldn't budge. I pushed and pulled with all my might, but it was like it had been sealed shut. I turned around and looked for another way out, but there was none. The windows were far too small to climb through, and the walls were solid wood. That's when I saw the writing on the walls begin to glow. It was a faint green light pulsing with an otherworldly energy. As I watched in horror, the words began to move, shifting and changing until they formed a new phrase. "You are never leaving," it said. The growling grew louder, and I realized that whatever was outside the cabin was coming closer. I was trapped with no way out. I heard the door creak open behind me, and I turned around to face it as soon as possible. My attacker. It was a monster unlike anything I've ever seen before. It was humanoid in shape, but covered in matted fur and scales. Its eyes glowed red in the darkness, and its mouth was filled with razor-sharp teeth. I tried to run, but it was far too fast. It caught me by the arm and lifted me right off of the ground, its grip crushing my bones. I screamed in pain and terror, my mind racing with thoughts of escape, but it was no use. The monster had me in its clutches, and there was no way out. As it dragged me towards the back of the cabin, I caught a glimpse of something on the wall. It was a small symbol etched into the wood in what looked like blood. I didn't have time to think about it, as the monster threw me into a small room at the back of the cabin. It was like a prison cell with thick iron bars blocking the only exit. I looked around in desperation, trying to find a way out, but there was none. I was trapped, alone in the dark, with the monster lurking just outside. At this point, days turned into weeks, and I lost track of time. I was barely surviving, living off of scraps of food and water that the monster left for me. But as weeks turned into months, I began to notice something strange. The symbol on the wall was glowing just like the writing on the walls had before. At first, it was a faint green light like before, but as time passed, it grew brighter and brighter until it was like a beacon in the darkness. I knew I had to do something. I didn't know what the symbol meant or how it was related to the monster, but it was my only hope, I think. I reached out and touched the symbol, and as soon as I did, the world around me began to shift and change. It was like I was in a dream, but I knew it was real. The bars of my prison cell began to melt away, and the walls of the cabin began to crumble. The monster roared in anger, but it was too late. I was free, I think. I stumbled out into the daylight, blinking in the bright sun. It was like I was reborn, like I was seeing the world for the first time. I turned around to face the cabin, but it was gone. In its place was a small stone altar with the symbol from the wall etched right into its surface. I knew then that the symbol held the key to defeating the monster that had kept me in captive for far too long. But I had no idea how to use it or what it even meant. I spent days wandering through the forest searching for some kind of clue. I was weak and starving, but I refused to give up. I had to find a way to destroy the monster, to make it pay for what it had done to me. Finally, I stumbled upon an old book in a long-abandoned cabin. It was bound in leather and written in a language I could not recognize. But as I flipped through the pages, I saw the same symbol etched right into the margins. As I read through the book, I realized that it was a grimoire, a book of spells and incantations. And at the heart of the book was a ritual that promised to banish any evil presence from the world. I knew what I had to do. I had to perform this ritual to use its power of the symbol to banish the monster from this world. I gathered the ingredients I needed to set up work. It was a long and grueling process, and I made mistake after mistake, but I refused to give up. Finally, after hours of chanting and burning incense, the ritual was complete. The air crackled with energy, and I knew something had changed. I made my way back to the altar where I had first found the symbol, and I saw that it was glowing brighter than ever before. And then, in a blinding flash of light, the monster appeared right before me. It was different now, weakened by the power of the ritual, its fur thin and patchy, and its eyes no longer glowing with the same ferocity as before. It snarled and lunged at me, but I stood my ground this time. I held up the grimoire and recited the final incantation, and with a final burst of energy, the monster was gone. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted but victorious. I had defeated the monster, banished it from the world forever. But as I looked up at the sky, I knew that my victory was not without cost. The monster had taken something from me, something that I would never be able to get back. I had lost a part of myself in the struggle, and I knew that I would never be the same again. But I also knew that I had found a strength within myself I had never knew before. As I made my way back through the forest, I knew that I would never forget the horror that I had experienced. But I also knew that I've come out on the other side, stronger and more resilient than ever before. As I walked away from the ruins of the cabin, I knew that I had found a power within myself that could never be taken away. Days passed and I found myself struggling to adapt to a life outside of the forest. I couldn't shake the feeling that the monster was still out there waiting for me. But slowly as time passed, I began to heal. I met new people, made new friends, and started to feel like myself again. But I never forgot the horror that I had once experienced, and every time I saw the symbol that had saved my life, I felt a shiver run right down my spine. Years went by, and I grew old. I had children and then grandchildren, and life moved on. But even on my deathbed, as I took my last breaths, I knew that the memory of the monster would never truly leave me. It was part of who I was, a part of my story. And as I closed my eyes for the final time, I knew that I had lived a life full of horror, but also full of strength and resilience. For in the end, it was not the monster that defined me, but the strength that I found within myself to defeat it.